Usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there's this expectation of like absolute precision.
Right, like it's engineering or something.
Exactly. I mean, you fall off a ladder, your arm swells up, and you go to the hospital, they put you in the machine, the x-ray pops up on the screen, and the doctor just points to that jagged white line on the bone and says, well, there it is. That's the problem.
It's wonderfully binary.
Yes.
The bone is either intact or it's fractured. And the intervention is totally clear. You cast it, you set it, you wait.
Right. And there's just a profound comfort in that. We are wired to like things that are visible, categorizable, and fixable with a concrete set of steps.
Oh, absolutely.
But then you step out of the hospital and into the world of human behavior. You step into the realm of messy relationships, broken trust, and like organizational disasters.
Yeah, and suddenly that x-ray machine is completely useless.
Right. We are looking at a diagnostic landscape that is entirely invisible to the naked eye. I mean, we know something is broken between two people or between a company and its customers, but we can't just point to a glowing white line on a screen to prove it.
Which is why the mechanics of trust repair are often treated like some kind of dark art.
Yes, totally.
People assume it's just about having a good vibe or being naturally charismatic.
Yeah.
But when you look at the research we've pulled together for you today, you realize that isn't true at all. The invisible fracture actually has a highly specific anatomy.
And that brings us to the core of what we're doing here today on the College Prof Chalk Talk Deep Dive. Welcome, by the way. We're so glad you are here with us.
Oh, God.
We are taking you on a journey into one of the most universally experienced yet fundamentally misunderstood human interactions, which is the apology.
And we don't mean the reflexive, oh, sorry, I bumped your elbow in the grocery store kind of apology.
Yep. No. I mean the high-stakes moments. A personal misstep that shatters a friendship, or a leader making a catastrophic error that costs people their livelihoods, or, a massive organizational failure that makes international news.
They're really heavy stuff. We are unpacking the actual science of accountability today.
Exactly. We are using a massive stack of papers, which we'll just refer to collectively throughout this deep dive as the research, to figure out the specific variables that make an apology actually heal the fracture, versus the ones that cause the whole relationship to just, go necrotic.
Because if you think about it, we're all out here operating without a manual. You are taught how to tie your shoes, how to do algebra, how to drive a car.
Right.
But when it comes to the single most important mechanism for maintaining human connection, like how to properly own your failures, we are just expected to figure it out by osmosis.
Which is wild.
It is. And the research proves that our instincts are usually terrible. We get defensive, we deflect, we try to manage the optics instead of managing the harm.
So let's put this under the microscope. We need to start at the absolute micro level. When you are standing in front of someone and the air has gone completely out of the room because you've undeniably messed up,
Yeah.
what are the actual words that should come out of your mouth? Because most of us recognize a bad apology instantly.
Oh, for sure.
You hear a politician on television say, I'm sorry if anyone was offended, and your brain instantly throws a red flag. You know it's garbage.
It's the worst.
But if I handed you a blank piece of paper and said, hey, write the perfect apology, the page would probably stay blank.
We freeze up because we think we need to summon a feeling rather than assemble a structure. But the research from Roy Lewicki and his team fundamentally changes this paradigm.
Okay, let's get into Lewicki.
Yeah, so they didn't look at apologies as an emotion. They looked at them as an architecture.
Yeah.
They ran this massive study with 755 people across 2 different experiments.
Wow, 755. That's a huge sample.
It really is. And they essentially reverse engineered the phrase, I'm sorry. They wanted to know if you could break down an apology into distinct, measurable, load-bearing pillars.
And they found 6 of them, right? I want to explore these because it feels like uncovering the source code for human forgiveness.
They did. They identified 6 very specific verbal components. Do you want me to just list them out?
Yeah, let's lay them out first.
Okay. The first is an expression of regret. The second is an explanation of what went wrong. The third is an acknowledgement of responsibility.
Okay, that's 3.
Fourth is a declaration of repentance. Fifth is an offer of repair.
Yeah.
And the sixth, is a request for forgiveness.
Okay, let's pause there because my immediate reaction is just sheer overwhelm.
It's a lot of words.
It is. Expression of regret, explanation of what went wrong, acknowledgement of responsibility, declaration of repentance, offer of repair, request for forgiveness. I mean, if I just rattled all 6 of those off after forgetting to pick up my friend from the airport, it wouldn't sound like I was apologizing.
What would it sound like?
It would sound like I was reading a drafted statement from a hostage negotiator.
Hmm.
Like, does the research genuinely suggest we need to cram all 6 of these into every single interaction?
It's a valid concern.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to sound like an automaton. But the study found a very clear correlation. Generally speaking, the more of these components you naturally weave into your communication, the more effective the apology is rated by the recipient.
Okay, so more is better.
Yes. But the groundbreaking part of Lowicki's research isn't just the identification of the 6 elements. It's the discovery that they are not equal.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, they aren't just a grab bag of nice things to say. There is a rigid, statistically proven hierarchy of importance here. Some of these elements do massive psychological heavy lifting, and some of them are practically useless.
Okay, let's unpack this. I love a good hierarchy. Let's build a mental model for this. I'm thinking about this like constructing a house.
Okay, I like that.
If these 6 elements are the building materials, what is the foundation? What is the one thing above all else that you absolutely must have or the whole structure just collapses?
The undeniable foundation, like the absolute most critical element across every single variation of the study, is component number 3. Acknowledgement of responsibility.
Acknowledgement of responsibility.
Exactly. If you strip an apology down to its barest bones, if you only have breath for one sentence, it has to be a clear, unequivocal statement of, it is my fault, and I made a decision that caused this.
Why does that specific phrasing carry so much more weight than simply saying, I feel terrible about this?
Yeah.
Because I feel terrible is the expression of regret, right? Why does regret score lower than responsibility?
Because regret is ultimately about your internal state. It's you reporting on your own emotional weather.
Oh, wow. Your emotional weather.
Yeah, saying I feel sad is nice, but it doesn't fundamentally alter the power dynamic that your transgression created.
Right.
When you mess up, you take agency away from the victim.
Right.
Acknowledgement of responsibility is the verbal mechanism of handing that agency back. It's you putting yourself on the hook. It tells the victim, we exist in a shared reality where my actions have consequences, and I am not going to gaslight you about who caused the pain.
That is so powerful. Okay, so acknowledgement of responsibility is the concrete foundation. What's the framing? Like, what comes in at number 2?
The second most powerful element is component number 5, offer of repair.
So if I say, I broke the window, it's my fault, that's the responsibility, and here's my credit card to pay for the glass.
Exactly. Because an offer of repair bridges the gap between rhetoric and reality. It proves that talk isn't cheap.
Talk is cheap, yeah.
Right. Acknowledgement of responsibility says, I see the deficit I created in your life. The offer of repair says, I am going to spend my own resources, my time, my money, my social capital, to fill that deficit. It transforms the apology from a passive statement into an active physical process.
Okay, I'm tracking with you. If acknowledgement of responsibility is the foundation and the offer of repair is the framing, what about the very last one on your list, component number 6?
The request for forgiveness.
Yeah, the request for forgiveness. Where does that fit into our house? Is that like the roof?
Not even close. If we are using your house analogy, the request for forgiveness is a decorative lawn flamingo you stuck in the front yard.
Wait, really? A lawn flamingo?
The research found that the request for forgiveness is statistically the least effective element of all 6. It is at the absolute bottom of the hierarchy. Not at all. In fact, you can completely omit it from your apology, and the recipient's rating of your sincerity and effectiveness will barely drop at all.
I find that deeply counterintuitive, like almost jarring.
Why is that?
Because think about how we socialize children. If a kid snatches a toy from their sibling, the parent marches them over and says, say you're sorry. The kid mutters, sorry. And what does the parent inevitably prompt next? And what else do you say? And the kid sighs and says, will you forgive me?
Yeah, that's exactly how it goes.
We are culturally conditioned to believe that an apology isn't complete until you ask for that absolution. Why does the research say it's essentially useless?
To understand why it fails, you have to look at the invisible transaction happening in that moment. What are you actually doing when you ask, will you forgive me?
You're trying to close the loop, I guess. You're trying to resolve the tension.
But who are you asking to resolve the tension?
Oh,
You are asking the victim. When you make a request for forgiveness, you are suddenly making a demand. You have already harmed this person, and now by asking them to forgive you, you are assigning them emotional homework.
Emotional homework. Wow.
Yes, you are pressuring them to process their pain on your timeline, to release you from your guilt, and to verbally validate that you are still a good person. It's incredibly selfish, structurally speaking.
Oh, wow. I've never looked at it that way, but you're absolutely right. It's essentially saying, hey, I caused a mess, and now I need you to clean up my conscience so I can sleep tonight.
Precisely. The most effective apologies, the ones built on responsibility and repair, focus entirely on the transgressor doing the heavy lifting. They don't require the victim to do anything but receive the repair.
Right.
The moment you demand forgiveness, you shift the burden back onto the person who was already bleeding.
That completely shatters my mental models how to handle a conflict. But let's look at the dark side of this structure. Let's talk about how these elements get weaponized or undermined.
Oh, this is important.
Because we've all experienced apologies that sound technically correct but still make us furious. And the research highlights a very specific linguistic trap, a three-letter word that essentially detonates the entire structure of the apology.
Yes.
The word but.
Yes, the infamous but pivot. This usually happens around component number 2, which is the explanation of what went wrong.
Right, because an explanation feels necessary. If I'm an hour late to meet you for dinner, I can't just walk in and say, I'm responsible, I'll buy your dinner.
Right, you'd sound like a sociopath.
Yeah. You're sitting there wondering, did you forget about me? Do you hate me? Did you get hit by a bus? The explanation provides the context so you know I didn't maliciously abandon you.
Context is vital. An explanation is supposed to be a neutral, chronological recounting of the systemic failure that led to the harm. But here is the critical vulnerability in the psychology of the transgressor.
Okay.
Sitting in the discomfort of total responsibility is agonizing. Our egos absolutely hate it. So halfway through the explanation, our ego panics and deploys the defense mechanism. It introduces the word but.
Like, I'm so sorry I was an hour late to dinner. I know it's my fault and I'll pay the bill, but the traffic on the interstate was just totally unprecedented.
And right there, in a fraction of a second, the fundamental nature of your statement changes. The moment you use the word but, you swap a valid explanation for a justification.
What's the functional difference between those two things in the recipient's brain?
It's a question of where the locus of control resides. An explanation keeps the accountability centered on you. Like, I misjudged the travel time and I failed to check the traffic report.
Got it.
A justification uses the but as a fulcrum to violently shift the weight of the blame outside of your agency. It tells the recipient, I am performing the ritual of an apology, however. The true overriding cause of this harm resides over here, with the traffic, or my alarm clock, or this other department at work.
So it's an illusion. It's an attempt at self-protection wearing the mask of an apology.
Exactly. And the recipient's brain is highly calibrated to detect this. The moment they hear the but, their trust repair mechanism shuts down. They realize you aren't actually holding the foundation of responsibility.
You're pointing at the foundation and saying, look at this shoddy concrete someone else poured.
Yes. You cannot rebuild trust while simultaneously arguing that you didn't really break it.
I want to dig into how Lewicki and his team actually measured this, because reading these elements in a vacuum is one thing, but applying them in the real world is chaotic.
Yeah, that's annoying.
They used a very specific high-stakes workplace scenario for their experiment. I'd love to walk through the architecture of that test because I think it reveals a massive fault line in how we view human error.
The experimental design was brilliant in its realism.
Yeah.
They recruited hundreds of adults and asked them to step into a role play.
Okay, set the scene for us.
You, the participant, are a senior manager in an accounting firm. You are sitting across the desk from a job candidate. The interview is going well until you uncover a major red flag from their previous job.
Let me guess. They embezzled millions to fund a secret life.
A little more mundane, but highly relevant to an accountant. The candidate filed an incorrect tax return that significantly understated a client's capital gains income.
Okay, yes. In the accounting world, that is a catastrophic failure. If you screw up capital gains, the IRS gets involved, the client gets audited, the firm gets sued. It's a massive breach of professional duty.
Exactly. So in the simulation, the manager confronts the candidate about this failure, and the candidate responds with an apology. The researchers manipulated the written apology that participants read.
How so?
Well, some read an apology that only had the expression of regret. Some read a version with 3 elements. Some read the full 6-element apology. The participants then rated how credible the apology was and whether they would hire the person.
But the genius part of the study, the part that really fascinated me, is that they didn't just test the structure of the apology, they tested the nature of the failure itself.
Yes.
They split the scenario into two completely different realities.
And this is perhaps the most crucial takeaway from this section of the research. Half of the participants were told that the incorrect tax return was a competence failure,
Meaning what, exactly?
meaning the candidate simply wasn't knowledgeable about all the obscure, newly updated tax codes regarding capital gains. They tried their best, but they lacked the necessary skill or knowledge at that moment. It was an honest, albeit severe, mistake born out of ignorance.
Okay, so a failure of competence. I can picture that. What was the scenario for the other half of the participants?
The other half were told it was an integrity failure.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. In this timeline, the candidate fully knew and understood the tax codes, but they knowingly filed the return incorrectly.
Why would they do that?
They intentionally bent the rules, perhaps to appease the client, or maybe they were just lazy and didn't want to do the complex math. It's a deliberate deception.
Oh, man. Okay, so you have one reality where the person is just undertrained and another reality where the person is a calculated liability.
Right.
How did the 6 elements of the apology hold up when forced to bridge those two very different types of chasms?
The structural hierarchy held up perfectly. Regardless of whether it was a competence or integrity failure, acknowledgement of responsibility remained the most vital element, and the request for forgiveness remained the least. The internal mechanics of the apology didn't change. However, there was a massive overarching effect on the fundamental acceptance of the apology.
I have to assume people were significantly less willing to forgive the intentional lie.
Dramatically less willing, and this is vital for you listening to understand. The 6 elements are a tool, not a magic wand. They cannot erase the reality of the transgression.
Right.
People are fundamentally, psychologically, less likely to accept an apology for a lack of integrity than a lack of competence, no matter how perfectly crafted that apology is.
I want to explore why that is because I think it goes back to our house analogy. If I hire someone with a competence failure, the offer of repair is straightforward. I can send them to a 3-day seminar on tax code.
Sure.
I can pair them with a senior mentor. I can fix a lack of knowledge with resources. But if I hire someone with an integrity failure, how do I repair a fundamental willingness to lie?
You can't. Not easily, anyway. Competence is situational, but integrity is structural. We can extend grace to someone who doesn't know how to do something because we all have areas of ignorance.
Right, we've all been the new guy.
Exactly. But when we encounter someone who knows the right thing to do and deliberately chooses to do the wrong thing, our evolutionary threat detection system kicks into overdrive. The trust deficit isn't just a pothole, it's a sinkhole. You can pour all 6 elements of a perfect apology into that sinkhole, and it still might not be enough to rebuild the road.
That is a sobering thought. It means accountability is limited by the nature of the crime. But let's pivot, because the researchers, specifically Luecke, put a massive caveat on this entire discussion.
They did.
Reading a perfectly structured 6-element apology on a piece of paper in a laboratory setting is one thing, but human beings rarely receive apologies as text on a screen.
No, we receive them in person.
Exactly. We receive them from a living, breathing human being sitting across from us, and we don't just process the vocabulary.
No, we process the entire audiovisual experience. We scan for sincerity. We analyze posture, microexpressions, the cadence of the voice, and crucially, the eyes.
Which brings us to the next profound layer of the research. If Luecke gave us the verbal template of an apology, the study by Megan George and her team attempts to give us the visual template.
It's fascinating work.
It really is. They set out to answer a question that sounds almost absurdly simple. What does a genuinely apologetic face actually look like?
It sounds simple, but measuring it scientifically is incredibly complex. You can't just ask people to make an apologetic face and take a photograph.
Right, because if you do that, you aren't capturing a genuine expression of remorse. You are capturing a performance.
A performance, exactly.
You are capturing what that person thinks they're supposed to look like based on watching soap operas or, political press conferences. The researchers wanted to bypass that conscious theatrical performance and tap into the deep subconscious mental representation that we all collectively hold in our brains.
And the methodology they used to do this?
I have to say, it reads like science fiction. It is one of the most fascinating experimental designs I've ever seen.
The reverse correlation method. It is a stunning piece of psychological engineering. Why don't you walk us through how they actually built these faces?
Gladly. Okay, imagine you are a researcher. You need to pull a picture out of someone's subconscious mind. To do this, you start with a blank canvas. They use something called the Karolinska Directed Emotional Faces Database, and they created a base face.
A base face.
Yes, it's a computer-generated composite of dozens of neutral white male faces. It has no emotion. It's perfectly symmetrical, perfectly average, completely blank.
The ultimate neutral baseline.
Now here's where it gets wild.
Yeah.
They took computer-generated visual noise. Think of the static on an old cathode ray tube television set when you turn to a dead channel.
Like the fuzz.
Right, the fuzz. Just random, chaotic patterns of dark and light pixels. They took this random static and overlaid it onto the neutral base face. Because of how the dark and light pixels randomly fall across the features, it subtly distorts the face.
Just like
Yeah. One specific pattern of static might cast a shadow that makes the eyebrows look slightly furrowed. Another totally random pattern might lighten the pixels around the mouth, making it look like it's subtly grimacing. They generated hundreds of these unique, statically distorted faces.
And then they brought in the human element, the 400 forced choice trials.
Yes. A participant sits down in a dark room in front of a computer monitor. Two faces appear side by side. They are the exact same base face, overlaid with static, but the static on the right face is the exact mathematical inverse of the static on the left face.
Okay, so they are opposites.
Exactly. So if the random static on the left face happens to make the jawline look heavy and dark, the inverted static on the right face makes the jawline look light and narrow. The participant is asked a single rapid-fire question: which of these two faces looks more apologetic?
And they had to choose one.
They have to choose one. Then a new pair flashes on the screen. Which one is more apologetic? They do this 400 times in a row.
Now, think about what is actually happening in the participant's brain during those 400 trials. The static is entirely random. There is no objectively apologetic face on the screen.
Right.
The participant is experiencing pareidolia, the psychological phenomenon of seeing patterns in randomness, like seeing shapes in the clouds. Because they are forced to choose, their subconscious mind projects its own internal, deeply held template of an apology onto the random noise. They are actively searching for the signal in the static.
It's essentially a high-tech Rorschach test for social accountability. And the magic happens at the end of the 400 trials. The computer takes the 200 faces that the participant selected as being more apologetic, isolates the specific static patterns from those faces, and averages them all together.
It mathematically condenses all of those subconscious choices.
Exactly, into a single image. They call it a classification image, or a CI. And when you look at it, well, it's haunting. It is a literal visual photograph of an apologetic face pulled directly from the human mind.
It is a remarkable achievement in visual psychology. But the study didn't stop there.
No, it didn't.
Once they generated these aggregate apologetic classification images, they needed to verify what they actually meant. So they ran secondary studies. They took these newly generated faces and showed them to a completely fresh batch of independent participants.
The verification group.
Right. They didn't tell this new group anything about apologies. They just said, hey, rate this face on a scale of 1 to 100 on various emotional characteristics. How trustworthy is this face? How dominant? How remorseful? How angry? How sad?
And this leads to the massive paradigm-shifting reveal of the George study. What did the independent judges see when they looked at the subconscious template of apology?
They saw overwhelming sadness. The apologetic classification image scored astronomically high on the metric of sadness.
Okay.
In fact, in a fascinating statistical twist, the independent participants rated the generated apologetic face as significantly sadder than it was apologetic.
Okay, I have to stop and unpack this because it feels like a contradiction. They used a machine to extract the definitive essence of an apologetic face from hundreds of people. And when they showed that definitive face to new people, the dominant emotion perceived wasn't, "I'm sorry." It was, "I am profoundly sad."
Exactly. On a 100-point scale, the perception of sadness was scoring in the mid-90s. The researchers concluded something fundamental about human nonverbal communication. Sadness is not merely a byproduct of an apology.
No.
No, it is the core, load-bearing pillar of the visual representation. In the human mind, the visual architecture of an apology is inextricably rooted in the expression of sadness.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. I'm going to push back hard on this.
Let's hear it.
Because if an apologetic face is functionally just a sad face, then the research has just identified a massive exploitable loophole in human psychology. I call it the puppy dog eyes loophole.
The puppy dog eyes loophole. Walk me through the loophole.
Okay, let's say I am a deeply manipulative person. I screw over a coworker to get a promotion. I get caught. I know I need to apologize to save my job.
Okay, high stakes.
Now, I don't actually feel remorse, but I've read the Licky study, so I draft a script that hits all 6 verbal elements perfectly. I acknowledge responsibility, I offer repair, no buts.
You're prepared.
And now, thanks to the George study, I know that my coworker's brain is subconsciously scanning my face for one specific emotion, sadness. So I just perform sadness, I let my shoulders slump, I frown, I look at the floor, I make my face look miserable. Can I bypass genuine accountability and game the biological system just by acting sad?
It is a brilliant question, and it is precisely the vulnerability the researchers themselves identified. They realized they needed to answer a critical follow-up question. Is an apologetic face identical to a sad face? Or is there a microscopic, nuanced difference that prevents the puppy dog eyes loophole from working on a subconscious level?
How do you even go about testing the difference between two things that look almost exactly the same?
You isolate the variables. You break the face apart. In Study 2A, they use the exact same reverse correlation method, the static, the forced choices, but they changed the prompt. Instead of asking participants which face looks more apologetic, they asked a new group, which face looks sadder.
Okay, so now they have 2 distinct sets of computer-generated templates, one stack of classification images built purely on the concept of apology, and another stack built purely on the concept of sadness.
Right. And then, in Study 2B, they brought in a final group of independent judges. But they didn't show them the full faces. They cropped the images.
Oh, wow.
First, they showed the judges just the mouths from both the apologetic faces and the sad faces.
Just floating mouths on a screen. What did the judges say?
When rating just the mouths, the judges saw no statistical difference. They rated the apologetic mouth and the sad mouth very similarly. They recognized basic, primary sadness in the downward curve of the lips and the tension in the jaw.
But then they tested the top half of the face.
Then they tested the eyes. They showed the judges just the cropped eyes from the apologetic templates and just the eyes from the sad templates. And here, a massive divergence occurred.
What happened?
The judges rated the apologetic eyes as significantly more apologetic and significantly sadder than the purely sad eyes.
That is absolutely staggering. What does that actually mean about how our brains process emotion?
It points to a profound mechanism in our evolutionary biology. Primary basic emotions like simple sadness or simple happiness or anger are largely broadcast through the gross motor movements of the lower face. A frown, a smile, a bared set of teeth.
Like stuff you can easily fake.
Exactly. But complex secondary social emotions like genuine remorse, guilt, and the desire for social repair require a much more sophisticated signaling system. That system is located in the micromusculature around the eyes.
So the puppy dog eyes loophole fails. You can fake a frown with your mouth. Any toddler can stick out their bottom lip and fake cry, but you cannot easily, consciously control the microexpressions around your orbital bones to fake the specific, layered, socially complex sadness required for true accountability.
You really can't.
Our brains are highly calibrated security scanners, and they are looking directly at the eyes to verify the authenticity of the 6 verbal elements coming out of your mouth.
Exactly. If your words are perfectly hitting Lewicki's criteria, but your eyes are dead or angry, or merely performing a gross motor sad expression without the complex secondary signaling, the recipient's subconscious alarm bells are going to ring.
They'll just know something is off.
Right. They might not be able to articulate why, but they will walk away saying, I don't trust them. They didn't mean it. True accountability requires a level of internal vulnerability that physically manifests in the eyes.
Okay, I feel like we have mastered the individual encounter. We have the verbal script locked down, avoiding justifications. We understand the subconscious visual requirement of complex sadness in the eyes. But we have to zoom out now.
Let's zoom out.
Because the reality of life, and certainly the reality of business, is that a failure rarely happens in a vacuum between just 2 people.
No. Harm usually has a blast radius. It affects teams, departments, families, sometimes entire communities.
And this introduces a variable that completely alters the physics of the apology, the politics of sequencing, who you choose to tell first.
This is a critical transition in the research. When multiple people are impacted by a failure, it is rarely possible to get everyone in a single room at the exact same moment to deliver the perfect apology.
Right, you can't just summon the whole village.
Exactly. You have to make a list. You have to decide who gets the phone call at 8:00 a.m. and who gets the email at forward 0 p.m. And the research argues that this sequence is not merely a logistical challenge. The sequence itself is a form of communication. The order in which you apologize fundamentally changes the meaning of the apology.
Let me use an analogy to try and capture the emotional reality of this, because I think we've all done this.
Yes, sir.
Let's say I am house sitting for my parents, I'm walking through the living room, I trip, and I completely shatter an incredibly valuable, irreplaceable antique vase. It is my mother's prized possession. It's been in the family for generations.
No.
Yeah, it's bad. Now, my mother is at work, but my younger brother is upstairs in his bedroom. I am standing in the wreckage. My heart is pounding. I know I have to confess. Who do I go to first? Do I pick up the phone and call my mother, the person who has suffered the primary harm? Or do I run upstairs, knock on my brother's door, and say, "Oh my God, you have to see what I just did. I broke Mom's vase. I feel sick to my stomach. I am so sorry."
It's a perfect scenario. Let's analyze the motivation. Why are you running upstairs to your brother instead of calling your mother?
Because my brother is safe. My brother doesn't own the vase. He doesn't care about the vase. He can't write me out of the will. He can't ground me. He won't start crying. He'll probably just look at the mess and say, "Dude, Mom is going to end your life."
Right, he's just an observer.
Exactly. Going to him lowers my immediate suffocating anxiety.
And that right there is the trap. Telling the person with the least institutional or familial power might feel like accountability. You might tell yourself, well, I'm owning up to it. I didn't hide the pieces. I confessed.
But I didn't confess to the right person.
Exactly. The research is brutal on this point. Safe disclosures, confessing to those who cannot impose consequences, are often just self-protection wearing accountability's clothes.
Self-protection wearing accountability's clothes. That is such a piercing insight. Because if I am honest about that scenario, by the time my mother finally gets home and I deliver my 6-element apology to her, I've already rehearsed it.
You've taken the sting out of it for yourself.
Right. I've already bled off the sharpest edge of my own guilt by venting it to my brother. I have effectively managed my own emotional discomfort before I have even begun to address her actual harm.
Now take that exact familial dynamic and scale it up to a massive corporation. Imagine a vice president makes a catastrophic operational error regarding a new product launch. This error is going to cause a massive recall, and it's going to cost the frontline warehouse workers their quarterly bonuses.
That's devastating for them.
Yes, the vice president knows they have to apologize. If that VP discloses this failure to a trusted peer in the C-suite first, or takes a friendly board member out to lunch to break the news before ever communicating with the warehouse floor, what does that sequence communicate to the workers?
It communicates a profound, undeniable claim about whose standing in the company actually matters. It says that managing the comfort of the powerful is more important than addressing the pain of the vulnerable. And the devastating part is, once the sequence is broken, the apology is dead on arrival. Whatever that vice president eventually says to the frontline workers, even if they hit Lewicki's 6 elements perfectly, even if they have the complex sad eyes from the George study, it doesn't matter. The workers know they were told last. They received the delay as a confirmation of their low rank.
Exactly. The sequence outlasts the conversation. If you manage the narrative upward and outward first to secure your own political survival before communicating directly and fully with the people who actually bear the cost of your failure, you hollow out the apology. You prove that your priority is PR, not repair.
And this concept of managing the narrative leads us directly into what the research calls sense-making. Because when a leader is standing in front of a company after a massive collective failure, a missed target, a public scandal, a massive round of layoffs, the audience isn't just waiting for an apology. They are waiting for a framework.
Right. A crisis destroys the known reality of an organization. Sense-making is the psychological process of retrospective construction. It is the leader building a plausible, factual account of what just happened, why it happened, and what it means, so that the employees can actually process the trauma and figure out how to come to work tomorrow.
But the research insists that when leaders engage in sense-making, they often fall back on 2 highly toxic conversational crutches, 2 easy options that absolutely destroy trust. The first is minimization.
Minimization is the leader standing on the stage and treating the loss as smaller than it actually is. Like, yes, we lost our biggest client today, and that stings, But let's keep it in perspective. It's just a bump in the road. We have a robust pipeline. We'll make up the revenue next quarter.
And why does that fail? I mean, it sounds like they are trying to be optimistic and keep morale high.
It fails because it insults the lived reality of the audience. The employees who just spent the last 8 months working 80-hour weeks, missing their kids' bedtimes to service that client, know that it is not a bump in the road. It is a crater.
It's a huge deal.
Right. When a leader minimizes a failure, they are telling the employees, your pain and exhaustion are an overreaction. You cannot build a shared future on a foundation of gaslighting. Sense-making requires the leader to look at the crater and say, that is a massive crater, and it is going to take a long time to fill.
The second crutch to avoid is false consolation. This is the unearned silver lining. It's the leader saying, we lost the client and that's hard, but honestly, it's a blessing in disguise. Now we have all this free time to really focus on our internal culture and restructure our teams.
False consolation is incredibly damaging because it asks the audience to feel better before giving them a factual, grounded reason to feel better. It is a desperate attempt by the leader to change the emotional temperature of the room because they themselves are too uncomfortable to sit in the tension of the failure.
They just want the awkwardness to end.
Exactly. But the audience can smell the desperation. They know the difference between a leader who has formulated a genuine strategic pivot and a leader who is just spraying perfume on a garbage fire. True sense-making requires brutal honesty about the past and concrete, reasoned logic about the future. Reassurance without a supporting reason collapses on delivery.
Okay, this brings us to the final macro level of our deep dive. We have analyzed the individual words, the micro-expressions of the eyes, the politics of who to tell first, and the psychology of sense-making. But when a true disaster strikes a massive organization, a chemical spill, a data breach, a fatal accident, the leadership team does not have time to sit in a circle and debate Lewicki's 6 elements. They are reacting in real time under extreme duress.
Which is why organizations cannot rely on individual charisma during a crisis. They rely on formal, pre-existing frameworks. And this is where we dive into the final piece of the research by Hamid, Mohammed, and Ismail on internal crisis communication, or ICC.
The Hamid paper anchors its analysis in a foundational theory developed by a researcher named Coombs called Situational Crisis Communication Theory, or SCCT. We don't need to get bogged down in the textbook definition, but how does SCCT view the relationship between a crisis and a company?
The core premise of SCCT is that a crisis is not just an event. It is a catalyst that fundamentally reshapes how stakeholders perceive the organization. And crucially, the theory proves that the organization's response, how quickly they communicate, how transparent they are, how much responsibility they take, has a direct, measurable impact on mitigating the reputational damage.
So they have agency in how bad it gets.
Yes, it's not one size fits all. You have to match the communication strategy to the specific severity and type of the crisis. But the Hamid paper takes this further by focusing strictly on the internal audience, the employees. They map out the antecedents and the consequences of effective internal crisis communication.
Antecedents, meaning the structural realities that must exist inside the company long before the crisis ever hits. Because, as the saying goes, you can't build the fire station while the house is actively burning down.
Exactly. If you wait until the crisis hits to figure out how to talk to your employees, you have already lost them. The research identifies 3 critical antecedents, 3 pillars that must be constructed during peacetime. The first is a safety culture.
Now, I want to clarify this because when I hear the phrase safety culture, my mind immediately goes to an industrial setting. I think of OSHA regulations, hard hats, steel-toed boots, and signs that say X days without an accident. It sounds purely physical.
It often starts physical, but the concept is profoundly psychological. The research actually traces the modern understanding of safety culture back to the post-mortem analysis of the 1986 Chernobyl nuclear disaster.
Wow, really? From hard hats to nuclear meltdowns.
Yes, because the investigators realized that the Chernobyl reactor didn't just explode due to a mechanical flaw. It exploded because of a toxic, fear-based organizational culture. Operators saw anomalies. They knew things were going wrong. But the culture was so punitive that no one was willing to report the bad news up the chain of command until it was too late.
That's terrifying.
It is. So when we talk about a safety culture as an antecedent to crisis communication, we are talking about an open communication climate.
Yeah.
Do workers feel psychologically safe enough to raise their hand, point out a flaw, report a near miss, or tell their manager they made a mistake without the fear of retaliation or humiliation?
Because if that psychological safety doesn't exist on a random Tuesday when things are fine, it certainly isn't going to exist when the company is under siege. If employees are terrified to speak up, the leadership team will be operating completely blind during a crisis. They won't have the data they need to communicate effectively.
Precisely. The second antecedent required for ICC to work is work engagement.
Okay, I'm going to push back on this one because work engagement sounds like the ultimate HR buzzword. It sounds like something measured by an annual email survey where everyone mindlessly clicks 4 out of 5 just to get the notification off their screen.
I know exactly what you mean.
And honestly, if a company is going through a massive crisis, say a hostile takeover or a massive product recall that threatens bankruptcy, does engagement really matter? Isn't everyone just operating purely on survival instinct at that point?
It is a common critique, but the research heavily defends engagement as a critical structural component, not just a buzzword. To understand why, you have to understand what happens to human cognition during a crisis.
What happens?
When a disaster strikes, the environment becomes flooded with ambiguity and threat. The human brain reacts by spiking cortisol. Anxiety skyrockets, and our cognitive bandwidth narrows. We stop thinking about the collective good when we start thinking about self-preservation. Am I going to get fired? How will I pay my mortgage?
Right. It's a completely rational fight or flight response.
It is. But if the baseline level of work engagement in the company was low before the crisis, if people were already cynical, exhausted, and disconnected from the mission, that fight or flight response will instantly fracture the organization. Employees will actively hoard information, they will turn on each other, or they will completely disengage from the recovery effort. They will mentally check out.
The ship is sinking. I'm grabbing a lifeboat. Good luck to everyone else.
Exactly. But the research shows that highly engaged employees, people who display vigor, dedication, and absorption in their work during peacetime, have a buffer against that panic. They possess a psychological resilience.
Interesting.
And when managers utilize ICC to address not just the operational data of the crisis, but the emotional realities of the employees, these engaged workers don't flee. They dig in. They transition from "the company's in trouble, I'm out" to "we are in trouble, how do I help fix it?" Engagement is the fuel that keeps the engine running while the mechanics are trying to repair it mid-flight.
That makes perfect sense when you frame it around cognitive bandwidth under stress. Okay, what is the third antecedent?
Leadership effectiveness. And the researchers lean heavily on John Kotter's change management principles here. Effective leaders during a crisis don't just react to the incoming fire. They strategically align the crisis response with the broader long-term vision of the organization. They know how to create a sense of urgency to mobilize the workforce without tipping that urgency over into paralyzing panic.
But the research makes a very specific point about which leaders matter most during this process. It's not necessarily the CEO on the cover of Forbes magazine, is it?
No. The research highlights the absolute necessity of the line managers, the middle management, the direct supervisors.
Why are they the linchpins? Doesn't the directive come from the top?
The directive comes from the top, but the CEO is largely a distant abstraction to a frontline worker. The CEO sends an email, but the line manager is the physical embodiment of the organization's culture. The line manager is a translation layer.
Ah, I see.
They're the ones who have to take the high-level corporate crisis strategy and explain what it actually means for the shift schedule tomorrow. They're the ones who have to stand in the break room, look their terrified team in the eyes, hopefully displaying those complex, apologetic micro-expressions we talked about, and deliver the sense-making narrative. If the CEO is a genius but the line managers are incompetent, defensive, or lack empathy, the entire internal crisis communication apparatus fails.
Okay, so we have the 3 pillars. A company has spent years building a genuine safety culture, cultivating deep work engagement, and training highly effective line managers. Then the crisis hits. The company activates its internal crisis communication protocols. They communicate transparently, they take responsibility, they offer repair. When the smoke finally clears, what does the research say are the consequences? What are the outcomes of doing this incredibly difficult thing right?
The Hamid paper isolates 2 massive transformative outcomes. The first is perceived organizational performance.
Now, performance in a corporate setting usually means profit margins, stock price, market share. Is that what we are talking about here?
Not immediately. In the context of post-crisis analysis, perceived organizational performance refers to the internal stakeholders' belief in the company's competence and reliability. It's the employees looking at the wreckage and saying, yes, we took a massive hit. The system failed. But the way leadership navigated this disaster was transparent, ethical, and highly competent.
So it's a metric of resilience.
Exactly. And the paradox of crisis communication is that if a massive failure is handled with brilliant, accountable ICC, the organization can actually emerge with a stronger internal reputation than if the crisis had never happened at all. They proved they could take a heavy punch, remain transparent, and stay standing. They stress-tested the trust, and the trust held.
That leads perfectly into the second consequence, which is employee commitment. And I found this section of the research fascinating because they don't just treat commitment as a vague, singular emotion. They break it down into three distinct psychological profiles based on the work of Meyer and Allen: effective commitment, continuance commitment, and normative commitment. Let's walk through these because it really explains the internal monologue of a workforce. What is effective commitment?
Effective commitment is rooted entirely in emotional attachment. It's the employee's inner monologue saying, I stay at this company because I want to stay. I believe in the mission. I feel emotionally supported by my team and my manager. My identity aligns with this place.
Okay.
When an organization's crisis communication effectively addresses the emotional trauma and uncertainty of the employees, rather than just treating them like cogs in a broken machine, it drastically spikes this effective commitment.
They feel seen in their darkest moment, which bonds them to the group. Okay, what is the second one? Continuance commitment.
Continuance commitment is purely practical and transactional. It is the recognition of the costs associated with leaving. The inner monologue is, I stay at this company because I need to stay. The salary pays my mortgage, my stock options haven't vested yet, my healthcare plan covers my family's specific needs, and the job market is terrible right now. Leaving would severely disrupt my life.
It's significantly less romantic than effective commitment, but it's arguably just as powerful a motivator. How does crisis communication impact that?
Because a crisis immediately threatens continuance commitment, people start wondering if they will have a paycheck next month. Effective ICC must provide clear, grounded, factual information about job security, severance potentials, and the financial reality of the recovery effort. If leaders are transparent about the practical realities, it stabilizes continuance commitment. If they hide the financial data, employees will assume the worst and start looking for the exits.
And the final one, normative commitment.
Normative commitment is driven by a sense of moral obligation or reciprocity. The internal narrative is, I stay here because I ought to stay. This company took a chance on me when I was inexperienced. They paid for my master's degree. My manager supported me when my parent was sick. Therefore, it would be wrong of me to abandon them now that they're struggling.
It's loyalty born out of debt.
Yes. And when leaders handle a crisis by showing profound human vulnerability, when they stand up and offer a genuine six-element apology, complete with the nonverbal markers of true sadness, and refuse to use justifications, it often triggers a reciprocal sense of moral obligation in the workforce.
They want to help.
Right. The employees see the leaders bleeding, taking responsibility, and trying to repair the harm. And that triggers a deep-seated human desire to step in and help carry the load. They feel a normative obligation to stick around and help the company rebuild from the ashes.
What an incredible synthesis. An effective internal crisis communication strategy doesn't just put out the immediate fire, it actively upgrades the emotional, practical, and moral loyalty of the entire workforce.
It is the ultimate proof that accountability, when systematized and executed with genuine human empathy, is not a sign of weakness. It is the strongest, most resilient building material an organization possesses.
We have covered an immense amount of ground today on this journey. We started at the micro level, dissecting the precise verbal anatomy of an apology. We learned that acknowledgement of responsibility and the offer of repair are the absolute foundation, while the request for forgiveness is completely unnecessary. We learned how the word but instantly transforms a valid explanation into a toxic justification.
A lot to remember there.
Yes, and we explored the stunning reverse correlation science that proved our brains subconsciously demand to see complex secondary sadness in the eyes of a transgressor before we will ever grant them trust. We navigated the treacherous politics of sequencing, understanding that safe disclosures are often just self-protection and that leaders must make sense of a crisis without resorting to minimization or false consolation.
Right, avoiding those conversational crutches.
And finally, we zoomed out to see how the massive pillars of safety culture, work engagement, and leadership effectiveness allow an organization to survive a disaster and actually increase the commitment of their employees.
It really is a unified theory of trust repair. Whether you are an individual trying to fix a broken friendship or a CEO trying to save a multinational corporation, the physics of accountability do not change.
They don't. But before we sign off, I want to leave you, our listener, with a final provocative thought, something to mull over as you go about your week. We have spent this entire hour analyzing the deeply human mechanics of the apology, the emotional labor, the ego defense mechanisms, the micro expressions of the eyes, but we are rapidly accelerating into an era where communication is becoming synthetic.
It's happening fast.
Organizations are already deploying AI chatbots to handle customer service disputes. They are developing digital avatars to deliver corporate communications.
Which leads us to a fascinating and slightly terrifying intersection of technology and the research we've discussed today.
Exactly. Imagine a scenario 5 years from now. A massive company makes a catastrophic error. They need to apologize to millions of customers. So they program an AI to write the statement. The algorithm reads the Lewicki research and flawlessly engineers a script that hits all city verbal elements perfectly. It takes total responsibility, it offers clear repair, it eliminates all justifications. And then the company delivers that flawless script through a hyper-realistic digital avatar.
A perfect face.
And they program that avatar's face using the exact pixel data from the Georgia reverse correlation study. The avatar's eyes display the perfect, mathematically precise micro-expressions of complex social sadness. It is, by every metric we have discussed today, the perfect apology.
But the audience knows it's a simulation.
Right. We know it's code. We know the entity delivering the apology has no capacity to actually feel the guilt that the eyes are simulating. So the question is, how will our brains react to it? If an apology is technically perfect, but delivered by an entity incapable of suffering the discomfort of accountability, does its structural perfection actually trigger our insincerity radar? Does it plunge us into the uncanny valley of trust repair?
It really makes you wonder.
It forces us to ask a profound philosophical question. Does true accountability fundamentally require the presence of human vulnerability? Or is the flawless simulation of accountability enough to fix the broken bone?
That is the frontier we are standing on, and it's going to test everything we think we know about forgiveness.
It's definitely something to think about the next time you get an automated "we apologize for the inconvenience" email from a no-reply address. I want to thank you so much for joining us on this incredibly deep dive into the College Prof Chalk Talk. Keep questioning the information around you. Look closely at the eyes when someone says they're sorry, and remember that when it comes to human behavior, the diagnostic landscape is never as simple as an X-ray. Take care.